Hey guys, thanks for joining us on this special episode, and don't forget to support our Patreon. Just $1 or more will get you early access to all of our content as well as other special features. Enjoy the show! The following is a fan-based video review under fair use. Frankenstein is owned by Universal Pictures, the Boris Karloff, Mary Shelley, and James Whale's estate. Please support the official release. And welcome back to the BigJackFilms Halloween special, taking a look at the iconic Universal Studios monsters. And on today's review, we're taking a look at the second iconic monster in the Universal franchise, with the scientifically created monster of Germany coming out the exact same year as Dracula. This one, of course, starring Boris Karloff in his iconic role simply known as Frankenstein. Dr. Henry Frankenstein, played by Colin Clive, wants to build a man in his own image, using the body of the dead. He and his assistant Fritz, played by Dwight Fried, dig up freshly buried coffins and hanging men. When they realize the head of the brains of the bodies are severely damaged, they decide to steal the brain from Dr. Frankenstein's former teacher, Dr. Waldman, played by Van Helsing himself, Edward Van Sloan. When Fritz accidentally drops the glass of jar with the label Good Brain on it on the floor, he decides to take the glass jar with the label Bad Brain. Using some kind of mysterious ray that Dr. Frankenstein discovered, the body is brought to life during a thunderstorm, and the monster of Frankenstein, played by the legendary horror icon Boris Karloff, is born. Frankenstein is conflicted to either study the monster or destroy it, to save himself and live a normal life with his fiancée, played by Mae Clarke. But when the monster breaks loose on the towns of Germany, Frankenstein must face his creation and suffer the consequences of playing God to create a monstrous aberration of nature. Now, much like their cinema rivalry in pop culture, how does the Monster of Germany compare to the Monster of Transylvania? Well, as much as I prefer Dracula, Frankenstein as a film is equal and on par with the Great Counts. My earliest experience with Frankenstein was more so watching several cartoons and media which parodied the film, not to mention visiting Universal Studios Florida in 1998 and being partially abducted by the monster, which scared the crap out of me. Looking back, I could have ended up like the girl in the pond. What, too soon? I knew of the monster for years, but never really caught on to the original film until I first saw it in the cinemas back-to-back with Dracula. And to be honest, at the time, I actually found it to be the weakest of the two. But over time, with more viewings on Turner Classic Movies during the Halloween season, I've come to appreciate it more and more, and now I put it on equal value. For those who felt Dracula was too quiet, Frankenstein makes up for it with its crashing sounds of terror, outstanding sets and makeup, and once again, a brilliant cast of characters. Colin Clive is fantastic as Dr. Victor Frankenstein. From the opening scene, he comes off at first as a despicable person digging up the graves and stealing bodies for his experiments. However, when you see the effects he's put in and his ideals put to the forefront, you can't help but be intrigued and interested to see how it plays off.
We'll see whether I'm crazy or not.
And that's the power this film puts in the public's eye, and in many other films regarding science. How far is too far? And to quote Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park,
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
it's an interesting study in the human mind and behavior, and when Frankenstein unleashes his greatest creation, you see the change of a man whose mind went too far and doesn't know when to stop.
You have created a monster and it will destroy you.
But at the same time, you feel sorry for him in terms of his personal life being disassociated with his family and bride-to-be, for which just to get them out of the way. Frankenstein's family members are pretty much forgettable in this film, especially when they aren't the real focus, which is the scientist and his creation. Speaking of which, let's talk about the monster. And no, I'm not calling him Frankenstein. That's the name of the doctor. Get it right, people!
brain must be given time to develop.
And much like Bela Lugosi's Dracula, the Frankenstein monster is equally as iconic as one of the greatest horror images of all time. Created by makeup artist Jack Pierce's Oscar-worthy makeup and horror icon Boris Karloff, whose physical acting as the monster is both terrifying and sympathetic. A real first in the genre even before the mighty King Kong roared into cinemas 2 years later. The pure science of the monster is really eerie, and much like his animalistic behavior, he can be very unpredictable. But when his rage is exposed, he becomes an unstoppable force of nature, killing anyone in his path, making the conflict between characters really tense on what to do.
Patience, patience. I believe in this monster, as you call it.
And with that rivalry in Frankenstein comes Dr. Waldman, played by Edward Van Sloan, and honestly, nothing's really different from his role prior as Van Helsing. In fact, I like to think he's the link to all the monsters being canon to one universe. After the events of Dracula and the sequel, Dracula's Daughter, Van Helsing headed from Transylvania to Germany to come across another monster. Yeah, he was the original Nick Fury, unlike Russell Crowe as Dr. Jekyll.
You are a younger man. Best learn to be wary of a man like me.
God, that's still awful. Then there's Frankenstein's hunchback assistant Fritz. He's such a scummy asshole. It's much like Dwight Frye's previous performance as Renfield in Dracula, but much more resistant and taking out a lot of the sympathy. Fritz in a way feels replaced by the monster and ends up torturing him, even though the personality of the monster is technically his fault. The hunchback assistant would later become a staple of the Frankenstein mythology and mad scientist genre for years to come, and eventually taking up the stereotypical name of Igor. But that wasn't really established until being played by Bela Lugosi in Son of Frankenstein.
Yes, he was hunting.
Like I said before, the rest of the cast is pretty shallow and forgettable, from Frankenstein's wife and the other guy. Yeah, I don't even know who he was in the story.
You're crazy!
But aside from them, Frankenstein's father is pretty funny, and the townspeople with the torches and pitchforks hunting down the monster, another trope of the horror genre that has been imitated countless times throughout the decades. In fact, this movie really did start many tropes and iconic moments in the horror genre in general. The monologue of the actor presenting the film's shock value, made more so famous from The Simpsons, the creepy graveyard sets, the awesome detailed laboratories of the mad scientists, the young innocent child interacting with the monster, even some aspects of the Beauty and the Beast genre with the monster encountering Frankenstein's bride-to-be. Which, by the way, I love the monster's response here. What a stud. The film wasn't directed by Todd Browning of Dracula, but instead James Whales, another mainstay in the horror genre. Speaking of Dracula, Bela Lugosi was instantly offered the role of the monster after playing the iconic vampire, but he didn't really care for it due to being covered in makeup and little to no dialogue. And to be honest, that was a bold choice, because then Karloff would not be as famous as he is today, and the rivalry between the two would never have happened, even though they were best friends in real life.
Ready for the test, Dracula? I'm ready, Frankenstein. Then let us begin. You understand, Bela, don't you? That the one who wins this little game of chess is to lead the parade at the film stars' frolic. Okay, Boris. You'll move. Right.
Once again, much like Dracula, the movie has little to no original score in the film, only the opening and closing credits. But much like Swan Lake with Dracula, the music here represents the themes of the films quite well. But one thing this movie did to up Dracula is the sound design. And for 1931, even before the revolutionary techniques of King Kong, the sound design in Frankenstein is spectacular, and an eerie atmosphere of lightning and stormatic tone create a foreboding mood to the film that adds to so many of its scares. Not to mention Karloff's iconic growls. I never got tired of that. Unfortunately, over the years, the movie suffered massive censorship due to the Motion Picture Association's policies around 1938. Several violent scenes and dialogue depicting sacrilegious tones were cut from the film and thought to have been lost for years, but only with DVD and Blu-ray releases have they been restored 100%. Now once again, I haven't read the original novel by Mary Shelley, but from what I'd gathered, this film and its more successful sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, are decent adaptations of Shelley's work, and still remain the most famous incarnations of the book to date, not to mention one of the most iconic horror films of all time, especially for Universal, who still celebrates the film's legacy with merchandise, a cereal, and even attractions at Universal theme parks. Seeing the recreated Frankenstein labs in the Universal House of Horrors maze made me appreciate all the work in creating those sets in the original films.
Quite a good scene, isn't it?
Overall, Frankenstein is a classic beyond measure, paving the way for later incarnations and creating some of the most iconic tropes in the horror genre. The sets are absolutely spectacular, the makeup by Jack Pierce is outstanding for 1931, the cast is brilliant, and the cinematography along with the sound design really improved over Dracula a few months prior. If you're a horror fan and a classic movie buff, this is a film to really add to your collection, coming in at a monster-sized 9 out of 10. While it's 1 point lower than Dracula, it's still a great movie and a classic horror film that we owe a lot of thanks for in creating a pop culture icon. Dr. Victor Frankenstein might have made a mistake in playing God, but we of course appreciate it for all it brought to the lab table.
It's alive! In the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God!
And that, my friends, is the story of Frankenstein, an equal rival to Dracula. But of course I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Frankenstein and Dracula, and which one is your favorite? Let me know in the comments section below. So join me next time when we go from the Transylvanias of Germany to the ancient temples of Egypt with The Mummy. No, not the Brendan Fraser one, the original Mummy.